Chapter 7, Applying the Redundancy Principle, explain visuals with words and audio or text, but not both. When creating multimedia presentations, those that contain a graphic, which is then explained through narration, does not need on-screen text. The addition of on-screen text can become confusing for learners in a variety of ways. The primary concern is that learners could potentially put forth effort into reading the words on the screen rather than pay attention to the graphic and the narration. It is best if learners are not exposed to redundant means of expression, especially if the potential for cognitive overload is present. Cognitive overload occurs when the visual channel is overloaded with too much information, such as a graphic explained through narration and the inclusion of on-screen text that mirrors the information in the narrative. Some people believe that each person has a preferred way of learning, a learning style. Those styles include visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning. Some might argue that in light of learning style, that the more ways in which information is presented, the better the learning experience becomes. Clark and Meyer, 2016, call this idea the learning styles hypothesis. This hypothesis is associated with the information acquisition theory of multimedia learning, simply that learning consists of receiving information. To follow this hypothesis to its end, the idea that 3 ways of presenting information to learners is better than only 2 ways. This hypothesis suggests that learners can choose the input that most matches their learning styles. At issue with the learning style hypothesis is that inclusion of multiple ways of receiving information could be harmful to the learning process. There is no available research that suggests that learners benefit from an instructor or designer who considers different learning styles. Instead, instructors and designers should consider the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. Clark and Meyer, 2016, surmised that learning is considered through the ideas that all learners have separate channels for processing verbal and pictorial material. Each channel is limited in the amount of processing that can take place at one time, and that learners actively attempt to build pictorial and verbal models from the presented material and build connections between them. Thus, the cognitive theory of multimedia learning suggests that the inclusion of multiple visual means of information input creates extraneous cognitive load. That is, the extraneous on-screen text, in addition to audio narration of an image, creates strains on the visual channel. Where narration and images are presented exclusive of on-screen text, then the visual and auditory channels are able to handle the information received by each. This slide contains a graphical representation of the 5 elements of multimedia. In the presentation of this slide, the speaker narrates the slide with the same wording that is present on the slide. This redundancy creates a cognitive overload in the text graphic channel. In a study of 2 student groups who were given the same information, one group received the information through animation and narration, one group received the information through animation and narration and redundant on-screen text. Those students who received the information through animation and narration alone scored 15% higher in terms of recall of the information. Thus, no extraneous cognitive load is added to the learner when the on-screen text is left out. Students are able to recall information better when redundant on-screen text is omitted. This slide is an example that supports Redundancy Principle 1. Avoid using redundant printed text with narrated text and graphics. Following this principle helps prevent overloading working memory. The eye focuses on the graphic, and the ears focuses on narration. This is an example that violates redundancy principle number 1. This slide, the narrator is repeating the text that is shown on the screen. Thus, the printed text is redundant. This can result in overloading the visual channel of working memory when the eyes are focusing on both the graphic and the printed text. Principle 1 focuses on eliminating or reducing memory overload. Because working memory has limited capacity, overloading channels can lead to reduced learning outcomes. By reducing the load on the visual channel, learning outcomes are improved. As explained. What happened to my picture?